a movement that's been going on in Korea for the last 5+ years, called the 4B movement. And so I'm going to butcher this because you would think with a Korean partner, I would know more Korean by now. But basically, the
Are you
four
about to speak
B's.
Korean?
I'm not. I'm not. I won't do that to you guys.
It's like, what?
That would be amazing,
This
wouldn't
is,
it?
I'm like, get my drink ready. I'm like, let's do this. Vanessa's
Someday.
about to sing to us in Korean, y'all.
Someday. But it stands for, there's 4 words in Korean that all start with B, right? And I'm going to butcher it. See if you remember the 4th one because I was trying to remember this yesterday. So
Mm.
basically, it's like no marriage, no children, no heterosexual sex, and no, there's one
It's
other one.
dating.
Maybe it was just no dating men or something.
No
It was like
dating
no
men.
heterosexual dating.
Yeah.
And the reason why, even though this has been going on for like 5+ years, it's kind of finally gaining traction, or like people are hearing about it here, is because there was a huge news article that just got put out that talked about how 150 schools do not have a first grade class this year
In South Korea.
in South Korea.
Okay.
And here's what I will say. I told you this today, but my mother-in-law, John's mom, I did not talk to her about this conversation. She came to me totally unprompted and said something
Mm.
about how her government, she said, in my country, the government is trying to pay women to have children. And I was like, oh, interesting. Why is that? I knew what she was talking about, right? And so we started talking about this movement. And I was like, oh shit, if this 77-year-old woman knows
Yeah.
about this movement. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like while they feel separate, they don't feel separate. Those two things happening at the same time ish in the States anyway. It feels like a larger thing is happening. Thoughts?
Well,
Go.
a larger thing is absolutely happening. I feel like you sent me a bunch of content and articles on this the other night, and I was like a giddy little girl in a candy store because this to me is just such unbelievable like evidence of the rise of the feminine principle happening in real time in our lifetime. And like, this is a larger conversation about what I mean when I say that. But, you know, you and I have had conversations recently about how struck I've been by the disconnect between, and I'm obviously speaking anecdotally on like things that I see on social media. And I'm sure that we live within a very particular vacuum anyway. So there's a certain way that we hear people speaking to conversations that like I don't want to minimize that when I say this. And there's a way that men speak to what they feel like is happening between
Mm.
men and women dating in relationships and the way that women speak about what they feel like is happening. And it's like, are we on the same planet? Because it is a vastly different perception from men and women in heteronormative dynamics and what they think is happening. And what I hear men saying is, it is like really hard to find women that are interested in like a normal guy. They want to date like the 5%, like most powerful, most wealthy, like tallest, like whatever
Mhm.
qualifications of man. And it's just like really hard out here. Or it's not even worth it because dating is such a pain in the ass. So we're just going to like sort of tap out.
Mm.
And then what I hear from women about the dating zeitgeist is more in alignment with it's not actually that men are competing with like the top 5%. It's that they're competing with how good it feels to be by ourselves at this point because the level
My
of
piece.
disappointment,
That's
yeah,
what I've heard. Yeah.
that I continuously have experienced in the realm of dating. And, like I don't know if you remember this, but I posted like the one time I did it. What are those things called?
Stitch.
Thank you, V. Thank you for being my brain. Like the one time I posted a stitch on TikTok, it went viral and it was with Dr. Peter Galloway, I think is his name. But he was talking about this thing about like how men aren't earning what they used to earn. And it's like making it like really difficult for young men to, he
Mhm.
used the word mate.
Mhm. Mhm.
But to find partnership. And what I said was, I think, women aren't looking for men within a certain income bracket. What they're looking for are men who know themselves well and who have a solid sense of self, perhaps men who go to therapy. This is like the thing that like excites women like nothing else. And it was
Mm.
fascinating, even in the comments section, like thousands and thousands of comments of women being like, hell yes, that's
Mhm.
exactly what it is. Men being like, you don't know anything. That's not what's really happening. And y'all are going to die alone with your cats. And I was like, wait,
The
what?
the
Like,
jump the jump to you're gonna die alone with your cats
I'm
is
like,
always
I was
fascinating.
just like, what do my cats have to do with this, first of all?
First of all,
But
you don't even have any
also,
cats, so what do your
it's
cats have to
just
do with this?
like, but it's like, we're not interested in what, like, if the men, and listen, there was a small percentage of men who were like listening and in
Of course,
dialogue
they're
with the
always going to be.
women.
We're not using the term all, right?
Certainly, but I'm like, Gentlemen, look at what the women are saying here.
They're
They're
trying to
saying
tell you.
what I'm saying is how they feel. You're
Mhm,
saying that's not true. That's not what women want. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure all the women are saying that's what they want. So it's like we're determined to not hear you. Do you know what I mean? Which to me
mhm.
is like fascinating.
Yeah, there's, I guess what I can speak to is from the experience that I've had within my own relationship,
Mm,
being with a man who obviously he himself is a therapist, but also, just this idea of like being committed to evolution and growth. And I think what I've heard him talk about, because he has struggled,
mhm,
as we all have,
mhm,
with some of this stuff. And I think what he has talked about is having a really hard time feeling like, and I'm obviously paraphrasing what he's talked about, but really like having a hard time feeling as though it's like all men are shit. They're the ones that need to do the work. It's all on them. Women don't need to do anything different. They don't need to do any work. It's all up to men. Like his kind of pushback, and I think what he has talked about with the men in his like groups and his circles and why they struggle is because it feels, that's what he said anyway, that it feels like it's just completely being put on them. Like you guys are
mhm.
the reason for everything that's wrong in the world right now. So like fix it, right? And I think understandably, and we've talked about this, people can't grow through shame. Like it doesn't help. It doesn't actually give them an opportunity to grow and evolve, which is why you and I talk about the cancel culture as being so unhelpful, right? Because we're not giving people an opportunity to actually learn from what's happening. We're just shaming them and shutting them down.
Mhm.
And I think he would, maybe not argue is the right word, but he might argue that like it feels like a lot of the rhetoric is very shaming. And so that's why I think he thinks a lot of men are not listening because they're almost like not capable of listening because they've been so shamed and shut down. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that feels like the biggest yes and
Mhm.
ever. Like, I would agree with what John is saying to an extent. And if we had not been living in a society where, up until a very short amount of time ago, women decided to partner and be in relationships a
Mhm.
lot of times because they were seen as like property and didn't
Mhm.
have
Didn't have a
a
choice.
choice. Like
Mhm.
if we're like on an equal playing field, and then we're sort of like to me that's a little bit like, you know, I have a problem with affirmative action because I shouldn't have to like, make up for things that I didn't create. Of course. And that's true. And it's not a level playing field.
Right.
So if women have been in this game and they've had to be in partnerships a lot of times because of survival, and now they're saying, I don't have to do that. And so if I'm going to be in a relationship with someone, a lot of my healing and reclaiming of myself is like I'm only going to be in relationship with someone when it is like adding something to my life. And I saw this meme somewhere where it's like women a lot of times will like choose to not be in partnership. Like that's just not as common of a thing for
Mm.
men to be like, I'm just
Yeah.
not interested in partnering. And so, like, again, I agree with what John is saying about like the shaming doesn't like support people in like calling them forward and coming into the conversation. And I think, for the majority of men, if we're talking about like the macro, it's like women are sort of like, okay, we don't care,
Yeah.
then don't come to the conversation.
Right.
Then don't be invested in knowing yourself well because here's what, like like we don't, and this is like I do think where men really struggle is hearing we don't actually need men. Now, I don't think that's true, but I do think that is the attitude that a lot of women at this point are taking. It's
Mhm.
like if I'm going to carry the majority of the emotional labor, if I am going to feel like I don't have an emotional connection with you because maybe because of your societal programming, you are so stoic and checked out from your own emotional landscape. If I have to do all of the things anyway, I can't tell you how often I hear women
Mhm.
say, if I have to do all the things anyway, which that is a reality in a lot of people's
Mhm.
partnership dynamics, then why do I need you here?
Mhm.
And a lot of women are saying, I don't
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was talking to him yesterday about everything that you and I are talking about, and I was like, "Dude, this is crazy." Like, it's not a new movement. It's been going on in Korea for a while, South Korea for a while, but the fact that it's like being talked about here and, women are talking about that specific movement and kind of adopting the tenets of the movement. Um, anyway, he was saying, he's like, what I worry about is, and he's like, I guess I'm thinking about my daughter. He's like, I worry about the backlash that's going to inevitably ensue. And I said, yeah, but here's the thing, we're already witnessing the backlash. It's already happening in legislation across the country,
Mhm.
across the world, really, right? Like very conservative leaders are being elected all over the globe, not just here.
Mhm.
Um, and bodily autonomy is being completely stripped away in so many places. And I was like, so in my opinion, that is the backlash. I mean, that is the response to the feminine rising up and saying, like, we've had enough, right? Like, it's time for patriarchy to evolve. Like, we're done with this nonsense, right? And he was like, yeah, no, he gets that. He's like, and um, let me back up a little bit. So the reason why he was saying that is I was telling him that I was watching this guy on TikTok who's a historian and a doctor of something. I'm horrible with this stuff. You always remember everybody's names, everybody's credentials. I'm like, some guy's a doctor. Um, anyway, he was talking about this term incels, and I thought it was really
Yes.
interesting. And so he said the term incels and like what incel actually means, he's not new. He's like, we've actually had this idea going way back in history. And he said, but the reason why it feels different right now is because this is the first time in recorded history that societies haven't had I'm butchering what he's saying, but basically like a purpose or like something to do with the incels. So he said, there's always forever and ever been a group of men that, for whatever reason, whether they didn't have the financial means, whether they just weren't attractive, whether they might have had a mental instability, which like back in the day, they would have just been like, either lock them up or whatever, right? Like they didn't care. He's like, what we used to do is we used to take these men who couldn't get a mate. He also
And
used
just
that word too.
involuntary celibate, like, just so, like, people that aren't familiar with incel know what you're talking about. Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
right. People who involuntary celibate, right? So a man who, for not his own choosing, cannot find a mate, right? And that's the word
Mhm.
that he used too. But what we would do is we would take them and we would put them in things like the military, and we would say, go out and conquer. And he said, like, if you look at history, he was saying that even like the Vikings, like most of the men that were called Vikings were incels. He's
Mhm.
like, we used to take their anger and their resentment and their frustration and whatever, and we would put them on a mission and we would say, go out and basically slaughter people.
Mm.
And what he was saying is that for a lot of those incels back then, the mission was there was like a dangling carrot that you might have an opportunity to get a mate because you would go to another area and you would conquer it and you would basically rape and pillage and whatever. And so it was like a dangling carrot for them to join these causes where they might die because they might also get a mate, right? And he was like, this is the first time basically in history that we don't have that.
Well,
And
that's
he was
just not
like,
true.
well, I just think it's interesting. I was like,
I'm
it's
like,
a,
"Well, that's just factually incorrect, John. I'm
well,
sorry."
tell me why you
But
say
there
that.
were matriarchal cultures, and that was not the case when
Well,
women
not
were sort
forever
of
and
like the
ever,
dominant.
amen. I'm just talking about in the patriarchal systems that we've had
Oh,
up
I'm
until this
like, "Well,
point.
I'm sorry. That's
No,
just
no, I'm
not
not
true."
talking about when matriarchy was a thing. I'm talking about within patriarchal cultures,
Yeah, and patriarchy
incels,
is
they used to
dying
use incels, is what I'm saying.
before
And
our eyes,
yeah,
and it's just like
I
even
just
the
thought that was a
idea that, like,
fascinating kind of historical.
the
I was like,
carrot
oh,
that we're dangling is you will get a mate,
yeah,
just like you will get a slave,
we're
just
not
like you
saying
will
it's
get some
okay.
land.
He
I'm
wasn't
not saying you
justifying
are.
it.
I'm just saying, like, it's time to evolve
Yeah,
beyond what this has been for thousands of years. Yes, we're well aware patriarchy has been unbelievably like maladaptive ways of being as humans for a very long time. It's dying. And what we're seeing with women in these 4B movements and men acting out as they are, yes, you're absolutely right, is the fish on land thrashing around
yep.
before it dies. But this is us witnessing the death of patriarchy. Something else is being born. And I think it is evolve or die time for my brothers. And listen, I am in such full support of like what is so unbelievably beautiful about the masculine. I don't think we've had any sort of models of what
No.
actual masculinity in its fullest embodiment looks like. Because even a man who needs some sort of a carrot dangled in front of it is
Totally.
such a distortion of what
Mhm.
masculinity is. Like, we
Yeah.
should want better for our brothers, from my perspective. Like, that's just, we're better than this. And I think everybody's sort of response is like, well, it's going to be like even Mikey was like, well, we're going to be like in Handmaid's Tale. And I'm like, we've
Yeah.
got to like stop with this like comply or die. Like, that is the only option. There is another option that like just believes in our ability to rise
Mhm.
as like souls, and not that like we are just like these barbaric egoic, bodies that like only can sort of identify with like our fears. I just think like we got to believe in something better being possible for us.